Hey guys, Eej right here, and today I'm going to be doing the 5th installment in my great classic album series. I have been having a lot of fun doing this, not only because, and I think I brought this up in my last video, but not only because I get to talk about albums I love, but also it inspires me to go out and find new albums that I previously hadn't heard that have been out for quite some time, and I utilize acclaimed music and acclaimed music forums quite a bit to find new stuff. And let's just get straight into this. As you know, if you've seen any of these videos, I do 10 classic albums, go through them in chronological order as to when they were released, and there really isn't any specific theme or style to any of these albums where they all go together. Occasionally that happens just based on what I'm listening to, but like this video, for example, you're going to be getting stuff from all different genres and all that. The first album we're going to talk about here is Tago Mago from 1971. Can is a psychedelic krautrock album, and krautrock's one of those albums that over the past few months I've been really kind of diving a little deeper into with bands like News, which I covered I think in my second or third video in this series, and now I'm talking about Can. With the sound that I pick up upon on Tago Mago is obviously the whole psychedelic krautrock thing, but it's a very jam-oriented album with a lot of jam-oriented, long-winded tracks. And there's a great, very eccentric musicianship throughout it, which really, I think, makes it stand out amongst many of its contemporaries, even in the psychedelic movement in the 60s and in the 70s. You know, one of the things that I think really did stick out to me was how seemingly some of these songs transitioned into each other, such as Paper House to Mushroom. And overall, it's a pretty solid and very spacey, echoey production, and that really shines really bright on the drums on this album. It's very echoey and very spacey, very atmospheric drumming on here, which I think are production-wise, and I think it really does give this album an extra psychedelic element that a lot of other bands from this era were missing. Overall, I think Tago Mago is a pretty solid krautrock psychedelic album from Can from 1971. The next album I'm going to be talking about in this video is from world-famous, legendary progressive rock outlet Rush, Moving Pictures from 1981. Now, this is their most popular album, I'm well aware of that, but there is just something about this album that just makes it one of the best progressive rock albums out there. It's, in my opinion, Rush's magnum opus, and it has a near-flawless track list. You know, the first thing to really bring up here is the fact that when it comes down to prog rock, it's very easy for me to get turned off by a lot of prog bands out there because they come off very pretentious and in your face, and like a lot of them feel very cocky because they are talented musicians and they shove it in people's faces. That's not what I get on this album at all. That's not what I get with Rush. You know, this album opens with the extremely powerful and just humongously famous Tom Sawyer. And it closes with the epic Vital Signs. You know, throughout the entire track list, they hit you with banger after banger after banger. And despite the excellent musicianship across the board, Rush has a knack for writing extremely catchy and memorable tunes while also keeping them very technical and very advanced. And that is actually, they deserve more credit for that than I think they are usually given. You know, a lot of these progressive bands, they really do get really technical to the point where they don't have much catchy melodies or stuff like that, and there isn't much pop appeal. But a song like Tom Sawyer will be stuck in your head for days. A song like Limelight will be stuck in your head for days. And even an instrumental track like YYZ, that little cymbal dinging, will be stuck in your head for days. So Rush really does have a knack for writing catchy stuff while also keeping it technical and prog. Unlike many prog albums, like I said, this doesn't come across as pretentious. This comes across as just a solid, true album that I think is Rush's best album and one of the best progressive rock albums out there. Moving Pictures from 1981. Jumping ahead a bit to the 90s, the next and third album I'm going to be talking about in this video is from punk band Jawbreaker, 24-Hour Revenge Therapy. Kind of going a totally different route from Rush and even Can. You know, Jawbreaker is one of those, it's a really excellent 90s punk band, one of my favorite 90s punk bands, and 24-Hour Revenge Therapy is an excellent 90s punk album that is a key album in the progression of emo punk as a genre. You know, A lot of artists from Taking Back Sunday to bands in my local scene to My Chemical Romance have all kind of cited Jawbreaker as well as this album as an influence, and it's very obvious why. Well, Jawbreaker does kind of still hold on to their California skate punk roots, which I really love quite a bit. I have a soft spot for skate punk. They really do boil it down to a much more emotional, introspective tone that you don't usually get on a lot of 90s skate punk albums. And you literally could hear it as being a direct precursor to, like, Taking Back Sunday. Not only is it just influential on the underground scene, on the emo scene, emo pop punk and all that, overall it's just a genuinely solid and passionate and heartfelt piece of work that I think is some of the most emotional and touching skate punk 90s type punk out there, in my opinion. This is from 1994, and I think that when you really put it in perspective, considering this came out in 1994, I would argue that 24-Hour Revenge Therapy is ahead of its time. So that is why Jawbreaker, 24-Hour Revenge Therapy from 1994, lands on my great classic albums. It's just a really totally overlooked album amongst the more music critic community, and I think they deserve much more credit. The next album I'm going to be talking about continues down this vein of 90s punk. From 1995, we have Rancid's And Out Come the Wolves. One of the best ska punk albums ever made. One of the best punk albums ever made. Rancid rose from the ashes of Operation Ivy after they disbanded. And, well, I do enjoy their first album and their second album, and I do enjoy much of Operation Ivy's material. There's no denying that Rancid really did take things to the next level. Perhaps the biggest sign of this is the musicianship here. Well, Operation Ivy was half of Rancid. Musicianship-wise, I would argue Rancid really does take it to the next level here, especially in the bass playing here. This album opens up with Maxwell Murder, which is one of the greatest bass lines and bass performances in all of punk, let alone ska punk. And it seems like a direct progression from the material that was on albums like Energy with Operation Ivy, which was one I was questioning talking about in this video, because that is an extremely influential East Bay punk album, and I feel like Out Come the Wolves is just the natural progression of that sound. With an extremely strong track list, it really does ride that fine line between skate punk, between ska punk, and even a bit of reggae influence is in there as well on a big song like Time Bomb. And at the end of the day, this is an album that I think just every listen I seem to pick out more little parts of the bass playing or of the writing or the production that I didn't get the first time. And to be honest, this album continues to amaze me, especially considering how powerful and talented Rancid really comes across on this album, especially compared to some of the previous albums and a lot of their contemporaries at the time. So, yeah, Rancid and Out Come the Wolves from 1995 safely lands on this list. The next album I'm going to talk about is... It's not punk, so this is changing it up a little bit. It is the self-titled Franz Ferdinand album from 2004. This kind of goes off of a lot of the albums I talked about in my previous Great Classic Albums video, such as Interpol, The Killers, The Strokes, etc. Franz Ferdinand really was spearheading the post-punk revival. I mean, they were far from being the only ones, but with the single Take Me Out, which was a smash hit, Franz Ferdinand really burst onto the scene in the 2000s, really making a name for themselves. It's a solid rock album with just excellent twangy guitar tones and just a very good, solid production. I don't have too much else really to say here other than the fact that I think Franz Ferdinand had a really powerful debut with an extremely strong and influential track list with a hit single which is undeniably one of the greatest singles to come out of this entire generation of music. Franz Ferdinand would go on to continue to make music, none that really impressed me too much, but I will say this debut album from 2004 really is, I think, one of the best albums to come out of the post-punk revival, and I think they really do craft a really good sound for themselves, and an impressive sound because they really did make themselves stand out amongst bands like The Killers, and, like Interpol and The Strokes, which were also getting a lot of attention and were really big at the time. So, the very raw, gritty, self-titled album from Franz Ferdinand from 2004 safely lands on this list. Now, going in a completely different direction genre-wise, the next album is from 2006 I'm going to be talking about. Gnarls, Barkley, Saint Elsewhere. This is one I've been really excited to talk about on this channel. Well, they do dive into some experimental hip-hop on this album. It's also very neo-soul and new R&B with just a solid track list with a very innovative sound. CeeLo Green just proves on this album, on the debut album, by the way, from Gnarls Barkley, that he is one of the best, singers of this style of genre of soul and R&B and of all that kind of stuff, even in hip-hop. And he has one of the most unique voices, and I also think one of the best and most powerful voices to come out of it. Obviously, most people are aware of the smash hit Crazy, which is huge on this album, but the album itself has a wide variety of styles on it. Well, it all kind of falls under that umbrella of soul, R&B, and hip-hop. You have some very dark tracks, such as like Necromancer, which have just very dark, distorted, gritty drums on there that really do just leave you wanting more. Or even songs like The Boogeyman, like songs such as that. They have a bit of a satirical edge to them, while also being very serious and delivered just furiously in a very passionate way, with excellent vocal performances from CeeLo. I love his nasally tone of voice. It's also worth noting, as a vocalist, he's able to hit high notes that many other singers just simply can't hit. And overall, I think Gnarls Barkley's debut album, Saint Elsewhere, is one of the most powerful debut albums from this style and this sound of music. And I think it's aged tremendously well. And obviously CeeLo went on to do his solo work, which I think is fun and good. But to me, nothing really adds up to the greatness that is Saint Elsewhere. I think Gnarls Barkley really hit it out of the park with this album, and I think everybody should check it out. Gnarls Barkley, Saint Elsewhere, from 2006. We're going to jump ahead a little bit to the 2010s. These next few albums are actually from the 2010s, because I figured in my previous few videos I haven't talked too much about that many albums coming out over the past 10 years. But these next four that I'm going to talk about, I think, are pretty classic albums at this point in my mind. The first one we're going to talk about is Perfume Genius Too Bright from 2014. An excellent art pop album, and Perfume Genius himself is just a very solid writer, very solid artist, and one of the best out there. I didn't review, but in one of those albums I missed videos, I talked about Set My Heart on Fire Immediately, which came out this year, which has increasingly become one of my favorite albums this year. One of, I think, the most captivating projects I've heard all year. And Too Bright from 2014 does the same exact thing for me. It has very heart-wrenching, introspective lyrics, on top of some of the most sparse piano and abstract instrumentals I've really heard in a long time. It's very shoegaze-inspired as well. That's kind of to be expected from Perfume Genius. But overall, I think the writing on this album is very solid. The arrangements continue to impress me. I like how some of the songs do take on a much more raw, gritty guitar tone to them, while others do embrace that very sparse, spacey piano vibe. And I think that, you realistically could put any Perfume Genius album on a list like this of great classic albums. There really is something about Too Bright that I find myself coming back to more than some of his other projects. I'm honestly not necessarily sure why, but I do. And I feel very confident putting Perfume Genius Too Bright from 2014 on this list. The next album is also from 2014. I didn't even realize that when I was putting this list together, but it is Run the Jewels 2. I think the best RTJ album out there. Great hardcore hip-hop album with some great conscious lyrics. In another Albums I Missed video, I covered RTJ4, which was released this year. And while I do enjoy that album, and it definitely will make my end-of-year list, I don't think it is as impactful as Run the Jewels 2, which I think remains to be their most captivating project yet. Killer Mike continuously proves that he is one of the greatest rappers out there, and the very dirty and grimy beats on this thing and instrumentals complement the angry and conscious lyrics perfectly. This is definitely, I think, one of the best hip-hop albums to come out of the 2010s, period. And a song like Close Your Eyes is just one of those hip-hop tracks that I keep on coming back to time and time again. Between the Run the Jewels fast hook to the actual just great lyrics on there. Overall, I think Run the Jewels really do hit it out of the park on Run the Jewels 2. And they're another group where almost anything. You could make an argument for any of their albums being the best, but I personally feel like Run the Jewels 2 is their most impressive work and their most captivating work and most relevant work as well. The next album I'm going to be talking about is from 2016. It is Young Thug's Jeffery. It's about time I talk about a Young Thug album on this channel, considering every time he's featured on a song, I tend to usually kind of enjoy it. Young Thug has continuously proven to me to be one of my favorite and one of the best rappers out there, with one of the most unique flows that are just like Lil Baby and Gunna really just try to copy. And I think that Jeffery is Thugger's most ambitious and extravagant work, and flamboyant work as well. Even though I do enjoy Beautiful Thugger Girls, and even though I do enjoy his studio album So Much Fun from 2019, Jeffery just has a very flamboyantness to him, a very good vibe to it that I feel like a lot of his other projects sometimes are missing a little bit. He has this very excellent, distinctive, very high-pitched auto-tune delivery that he really does hammer home, I think, the best on Jeffery. And to me, I feel like the track list is solid. His delivery on this album is solid. And this is just peak Thugger in my opinion. I don't know which track I would say would be my favorite. Kanye West is great. Harambe's more aggressive, weird, screeching vocals that Young Thug does is excellent. Even the opening track with the little guitars echoing throughout is another great solid track as well. Overall, I think Jeffery is one of the best of this era of trap albums to be coming out, and I do think that Young Thug continues to prove, not only on this album, but just in general, that he is one of the most promising artists out there, with one of the most distinctive sounding voices as well. And the final album I'm going to be talking about in this video is only from last year. Now, if you watched the first video in this series, I told you guys, when I say great classic albums, I mean anything from the start of time to last year, 2019, because I started really diving much deeper in the new releases and recording reviews on this channel in 2020. So anything I haven't covered is eligible. And so the album I'm going to be covering is Chase Atlantic, Phases. Now, Chase Atlantic is still relatively an underground group. I mean, they've had some hit singles, hit songs here and there on Spotify and in general. But Phases, to me, and Chase Atlantic in general, is a very alternative pop group that really does embrace a very electronic, very synth-pop sound, as well as bringing much of that trap-oriented hip-hop rhythms in there as well, with some very pretty-sounding auto-tune vocals a lot of the time. And they continue to do that on the album Phases. But they execute it very well here with a very strong, solid track list that really doesn't disappoint at all, with tracks like Phases and Heaven and Back being some of my favorite. There's no denying that last year, this was one of the albums I probably played the most. I think Chase Atlantic really does hit it out of the park here, with not only very personal and very just heart-wrenching lyrics, but also with a very strong, atmospheric, one of the best productions I've really heard on a pop underground album, really all year last year, and really just in general. I think that the blend of the more trap elements in there, as well as the very extravagant synthesizers throughout it. Overall, I just think Chase Atlantic's a very promising group that I'm always on the lookout for, and I really look forward to seeing where they go next, what kind of music or what kind of tones they go for in the future. And I just can't wait to see what they do, because the album Phases from Chase Atlantic in 2019 is a very solid pop album that I think everybody should check out, because it doesn't have that much widespread attention. I enjoy it, and that is the final album I'm going to be talking about in this video. I love making these videos. They're tremendous. So just a bit of a recap. The albums I've covered in this video are Tago Mago by Can, Moving Pictures by Rush, 24-Hour Revenge Therapy by Jawbreaker, Rancid and Out Come the Wolves, Franz Ferdinand's self-titled album, Gnarls Barkley, St. Elsewhere, Perfume Genius, Too Bright, Run the Jewels 2, Young Thug, Jeffery, and Chase Atlantic, Phases. Thank you guys for all tuning in and watching this. I love making these videos, and I know they don't get that many views compared to some of my bigger reviews that I do, but that's fine by me. This is just fun. This is just a fun outlet for me to discover new music, talk about music, and talk about it in a very casual, non-professional way, because that's the way I think YouTube should be. That is it for now. Hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys enjoy all these albums as well. that is it for now, and goodbye.